Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for being here with me today. I just had an impulse to have a conversation about integration and what that word really means. So I think these days in transformational communities, there's so many words that end up getting used and overused and get diluted. And then it's like, what are we even talking about?
Mm,
Do we actually know what we're talking about?
mm,
Words become buzzwords. And yeah, I'm really passionate about the need for integration alongside initiation. And it feels to me like there's almost a formula there that
mm.
transformation is initiation and integration. We can't have one without the other. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure if we always know what we're talking about when we're using that word. And
Mm.
so I just thought it might be useful and interesting to explore a little bit deeper what that word means. And yeah, I'm curious if you've got anything to say just off the bat about this.
Well, something I'd like to touch on at some point is what I mentioned before our call around what does integration feel like for people?
Mm,
Because I feel from my own perspective, there's been a shift fairly recently where I've felt like, okay, I've caught up with certain edges. And of course, I'm never going to be fully integrated because there's always growth and there's always my soul propelling me forward, or there's always new experiences to kind of digest and make sense and process. But I do feel like if I look at the arc of, say, the last 7 years of my life, which have been deeply initiatory and transformational, I do feel like I am in a period of integration, and I can feel that I've caught up with certain edges which 18 months ago I definitely didn't feel. I felt like I was still
mhm,
scrambling for meaning making, or there was certain polarities playing out, or things in my psyche that signaled, okay, there's not been a making peace with, or a deep sense of rest into the new stage that
mm,
I'm in. So that's something I think might be helpful to touch on for people, because as you say, integration is this buzzword, and it doesn't always mean time after a retreat to look after your body, even though that's helpful and good. It can mean deep psychological um, peace, I guess I would say,
mhm.
and meaning making and sense making of an experience in a way that feels grounded. That's how I
Yeah,
understand integration inside of me, anyway.
yeah, yeah, thank you. And listening to you, I'm thinking about, there being kind of layers to this.
Mm,
We talk about like taking a day off to integrate,
mm,
and that's actually really, I think, we mean rest. I'm going
mm.
to take a day off to rest.
Yeah.
Um, but to integrate at deeper levels is definitely a process that takes time.
Mm,
And you were talking about meaning making, and we could perhaps talk about integration at different levels of our being, you know,
mm,
at the mental level, cognitive integration. What happened? What did it mean? What did it mean for
mm,
me? And that is really important.
mm,
And then emotional integration, needing to reconcile, emotions that got stirred up, maybe from the past.
mm,
How do we bring our conscious awareness to those?
mm,
And then, of course, somatic integration as well.
mm.
And then, almost of a different order is behavioral integration.
Yeah.
Once I have within my system integrated the experience, how do I then actually translate that into how I'm
Mm,
living my life?
mm. That's the key, I would say. And
Mm,
that's where the rubber really meets the road.
right.
Because, yeah, another way of, I guess, talking about those, the layered approach or the centers approach is, I think it's good to articulate that different people have different access points to different things.
Yeah.
Some people are very embodied and
Mm,
process through the body. Some people are much more cognitive, and their access point to initiation or growth has been through the consciousness as a faster, easier pathway, and maybe the body has to catch up, or some people are driven to growth or transformation or whatever you want to call it through their heart, and are able to kind of alchemize relationships or whatever, because that's just what they do, they love, and then they can work things through that way. Same goes for integration, I would say, because we can cognitively make sense of something or understand something or talk about something ad nauseum what it was, how much I've grown, how developed I am, what insight I have about myself, but does it actually impact behavior in a way that feels grounded and rooted in the new state? Yeah.
Well, exactly. I mean, you mentioned the word state there, and I mean, one of the ways we could think about this as well is from integral theory, Ken Wilber's integral theory, the difference between states and stages. And, we can access states of consciousness in certain peak experiences and transformational experience. But we don't want to conflate that with the stage of development. And this is what happens quite a lot, that actually, integration in a way is the integration of what the insight, the feeling, the healing, whatever happened in the state into the stage of development that you're at. And that's kind of a different process. I've started to think about it in terms of the equation of that there's we need initiation to wake us up. I'm clicking my fingers. It's like the fires of initiation. We have to, and we might get a little bit burned, and we might also burn through some of the dross, some of the stuff that's irrelevant, but we're waking up. There's a sense of enlivening, maybe blowing through the cobwebs. So maybe it's like fire and air. And then we have to come back down to earth. And we need to be watered, So it's like then the medicine of the water and the earth. Watering, nurturing, nourishing, slowly building, slowly building, slowly building a life that actually reflects some of that magic that I've accessed in my interior. So, what I see a lot is, and this is related to some of the models I have from psychosynthesis. And so, I mean, it's relevant to bring that in because, it is what it says on the tin in terms of a psychology that is about synthesis, and synthesis is essentially integration. And so I've been thinking about that and what does it mean to synthesize and integrate psychologically. And partly there's something about making room for more within ourselves, because what happens, and this is the danger of initiation and peak experience, is that we flood our systems and it creates fragmentation. And so that can happen kind of like, there can be psychological fragmentation, of course, which can be difficult, but it also can just translate in this sense of it's really difficult to reconcile myself with the everyday now that I've been there, now that I've seen God, now that I've accessed bliss. And it's like, and I still have to do the fucking laundry and speak to my mum and and find a way to make money and all of this stuff. So we can have this, it can feel like a big distance. And in psychosynthesis, there's this idea of the different crises. So on the one hand, there being a crisis of meaning, which is what we usually understand as an existential crisis, which is people are in their everyday lives, and actually then life is beginning to feel empty, and then they want more, and then they seek some kind of experience, right? And so that's a kind of classic crisis of meaning, and I think that's happening more and more as consensus reality starts to kind of glitch, and people are just like, well, this isn't it, and then they're kind of, going, and of course, it's very easy to find experiences, initiatory experiences these days in terms of altered states of consciousness, plant medicines, and sexuality retreats, and all of this stuff. But what can happen is that then someone is blown open, and then they find themselves in a crisis of duality, where it's like, okay, whoa, I've had this experience, but what do I do with it?
Yeah.
No one's going to understand. I don't have anyone around me I can speak to about this. I've still got to get up and go to my job. I'm unhappy in my marriage, whatever it is, right? And it's like life is not friendly
Mm.
to the new understandings. And that is incredibly painful place to be. Incredibly painful because people feel so alienated and alone.
Mm. Mm.
And then what can happen is they start to just seek freedom by, breaking out of the prison with another transformational experience and but then it's, yeah. So I guess this
Mm.
sense of fracturing and kind of like the swing of a pendulum, it's this or it's that, and there's no real communication or osmosis, that's a lack of integration. And so over time, what needs to happen is that we weave that experience into our lives in a way that means that it kind of starts to impact the exterior, the interior and the exterior become more, there's a process of osmosis. And then actually the life around us that we build reflects the knowing that we have inside.
Mm. Totally. And I think that also leads to this feeling of not having to prove
Mm,
something anymore, not having to prove that whatever it was that drove the crisis of meaning. Often I think integration means that the peace is made with whatever it was that drove the crisis. So it could have been like, I want to feel existentially free, or I want to awaken my sexuality, or I want to get out of the box, or whatever it is. And often there can be this phase, for example, where if somebody's been a good girl or nice their whole life, and
mm,
then they start to get out of that box and suddenly they just want to be bullshit and tell everyone what they think because I'm on a journey of owning my power and da 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 da.
mm,
And but then actually integration is like, you don't have to tell everyone you're powerful all the time. You just are. You just be
mm,
it and you feel it. And so that's an example, I guess, of something um that I see can happen in the behavioral shift when that peace and integration is made with the thing that caused the fire in the first place. And there's this kind of, oh, yeah, like for me, I found that this is a bit of a tangent, but I always wanted this van. I always wanted a van
mm,
my whole life because I wanted to feel free in this van. And then I had a van and I did all my work and soul work and blew myself open to feel existentially free. And now I feel like I don't need a van anymore because
mm,
I realized, oh, the van is this metaphor for the inner freedom I'm seeking. And
mm,
when I look back at my life, there was so many behaviors and traits and decisions that I made and things that I did and hobbies that I picked up and ways that I expressed because I was yearning to feel that inner freedom
yeah.
and I wanted to feel that rush of exhilaration. And now I feel like I've found peace with that thing that blew me open. And I don't feel the need so much to have things on the outside that prove to me, oh, I'm free, for
Mm.
example.
Yeah, it's a beautiful example.
Mm.
I think in the way yeah, I see that process unfolding, in myself and in others of, yeah, looking for the thing out there, the things out there, the things, something I can consume, something I can participate in and, until it's just internalized as something that I am, something that I bring, something that I offer.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
that reminds me of that kind of, the language of to me, by me, through me, as me.
Mm.
It's, of these different kinds of states of consciousness, but perhaps also stages where it's
Mm.
like, in the first, life's happening to me. there's a
Yeah.
victimhood, and there's by me. I am creating my life. I'm taking responsibility for my life. Now, a lot of work happens there.
Yeah.
A lot of psychological, psycho-spiritual transformational work happens there, just in taking responsibility for your life force.
Totally.
And then there's even the kind of the through me and the as me, surrendering to something else, to being moved by something else, and then actually becoming one with almost
Mm.
that
Mm.
move, that movement of
Mm.
life that's
Mm.
bigger than us. But
Mm.
there's so much in just taking responsibility for ourselves.
Yeah.
So much.
Totally.
And what I always notice is we tend to think we're further along than we are
Yeah.
on any kind of path. But any kind of, we always have this bit of like arrogance of like, oh, there's these stages of initiation, or you find the model and you're like, well, I'm probably there, like I might not say it, but like inside, like I know. And actually, because because we may have accessed profound states of connection and bliss. And there may be so much spiritual learning that we've done that is also like really complex and nuanced. And yet, there's ways in which we're still avoiding
Yeah.
ourselves and the things that we don't want to take responsibility for, and this is human. And I know I'm guilty of it, and so there's a humbling, I think, that happens. I mean, in a way, I think you were pointing towards that with what you were saying. It's almost like somehow I use this language of strokes. It's like the first stroke of awakening or initiation is like blown open. Oh my God, like I'm
Everybody get over here.
yeah.
It's really good over here.
Yeah. And there's this need to kind of almost yeah, start to preach about it. And I know, and you should know, and this is the answer, and da 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 da. Um, and and then there's a kind of humbling, I think, that comes after that, which is like, when we think of that, some of the language around it is like the path of transcendence, the path of spirit, going from our individuality and that first being blown open to like, whoa, it's not just me. I am actually an expression of the one universality. Wow. And our eyes and our hearts and our minds are blown open. And it's beautiful. And that can last for years. And then there's a like, so what?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? What are you going to do as an expression of that universality? How are you going to show up and create a life that, is kind of honors that recognition, and perhaps is in service of it. And that we can call that a path of descent, or I often think that this is actually then where soul work comes in. And I feel that soul work is by its nature kind of integrating, because it's, we can't avoid the body when it comes to soul work. Soul work has to include coming into deep communion with our body, and that's a coming down. So I know for me on my own path, I started meditating and learning lots of spiritual stuff and reading so many books. Fuck, I've got so many books. And I was up there for years before I really came down into my heart. And the thing that helped me with that was therapy. When I started my psychosynthesis training, and I did 4 years of therapy, and that was not an initiation in the way that some other things I've done have been in terms of fire, but it was the deep watering of my being actually unlocked so much. I mean, I think that was by far one of the most important things I've ever done.
Yeah. And that comes back to the thing about the layers. And also I think different people needing different things at different times. It's so obvious to say, but I'll say it, that there's no linear trajectory of the path of awakening. There's times in our life where the fire comes in, and there's times where we need to really step back and think, okay, whoa, I need to get myself in order, or actually feel like what's the next thing that I need to continue on my soul's journey. And it might be foundations, it might be relationship, it might be closing the door on peak experiences, or it might be turning up the dial and thinking, yeah, actually I have capacity to really meet this thing, this thing that's gnawing at me. Like I need to actually meet that now. I know that I need to, having the bravery to open that door. But then there's layers, and I think that's where wisdom comes in, of how well do we know ourselves, how well do we know what we need versus what we want. And also I think that starts to illuminate where our spiritual growth originated from. Was it from a desire to be a better version of yourself? Was it from a desire to belong to a particular community, tribe, place? Was it something actually rooted in the personality that when that wound or that yearning gets satiated or healed, there can be an illumination of, oh, okay,
Mm.
actually I was being driven by this part inside that never thought I was good enough. Or
Mm.
yeah, I definitely realized that quite early on. I think I thought, I think a pattern is happening here where I'm just doing the same thing I've always done, which is just try and be a better person so I'm more likable. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's like spirituality that's the new vehicle to get there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that has to die. And I think the more we cling and rely on these drivers, if it's not like the source of truth driving us forward, the more painful it's going to be. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're pointing towards something really important, which is about how our personalities can hijack the
Yeah.
process of transformation. And, what I will say is that I do think that it is suffering that, at some level
Yeah.
inspires everyone's journey. And so I wouldn't want to say that that's wrong or bad. Like, it's the fact that we're suffering that leads us towards, well, how do I find that sense of meaning and wholeness? And integration actually means to make whole. But it's really important that we recognize, and often we don't have eyes to see this in the moment, um, how perhaps our wounds can overtake. And yeah, it's something that, I see a lot, as a genuine, of course, there's genuine experiences of connection to the sublime and the divine and bliss and all of that. And then there is the hijacking of that by the personality to create a spiritual identity.
Mm.
And it's almost like a spiritual subpersonality emerges, and we're overly identified with spiritual experience. And you can see that as well when then people are getting all the bling and the
The
crystals and
gear.
namasteing and lingering eye contact and all and all of this stuff, because it's like, yeah, I'm now identified with these things as spiritual, and my identity is spiritual, so I'm going to perform that.
Totally. I'm in the club. I'm in the
Yeah,
spiritual awakening club.
yeah. And I really don't want to kind of be mean about that, because I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
something that everyone does. And and I think there's a sweetness to it as we are finding our way, because
Yeah.
this is a path of development, actually. And although, like you're saying, it's not linear and it might be harder to define, there are also kind of stages and
Yeah.
symptoms at certain stages.
Yeah.
And so in the same way that, we don't kind of think badly of children and young people if they're not,
Yeah.
more mature in their ways. Like, this is part of immature, spiritual connection.
Totally.
And yeah, but then what can be challenging is then if actually what's happening is that psychologically there's a separate part that's enacting spiritual experience and having experiences, and it's not coming into connection with some
Mm.
other parts that perhaps actually it's trying to avoid through that. And of
Mm.
course, this is what we would call spiritual bypassing.
Yeah.
Um, and the best definition I've heard, or yeah, I like using about spiritual bypassing, is using spirituality as an anesthetic
Yeah.
to avoid our feeling.
Yeah.
And again, like, I have a lot of compassion for this, and I know that this has also been my path in the past, because of course, if we find something that
Feels
helps
good.
feel better
Yeah.
when we're suffering, like, of course. And yet, going back to what I was saying about the crisis of duality, it becomes problematic, because I think we've got a lot of people that are stuck in what in psychosynthesis we might call mystic flight.
Mm.
People who have, maybe like great access, like find it actually quite easy to transcend, might have great access to their intuitive, creative abilities, might have, even kind of powers of seeing, but that find it really hard to be in the world. And it's like, in order to really create change individually and collectively, we need to be, I mean, you were saying the rubber hits the road, kind of in the game. and all of that needs to come down to the ground. Um, and so I mean, this is why I'm so passionate about integration. It's because it's like it's the meeting place, you know, for actualizers who want more meaning. There's a need to kind of like integrate some higher states. I don't like that language, but I think we know what I mean. And then for transcenders who need more grounding, there's a need to integrate some kind of, yeah, some of the day to day. And when we can find that, that's when I think we can really start to live lives of meaning that ripple out and are rich with connection and belonging, which is what we're all seeking.
Yeah, totally. And I do think that that is such a can be such a challenging process, because the world as it is very it's very hard to be the free creative expression of your soul and all the wonderful things when there's also a need for rent payment and mortgage payments and family commitments, and you know the cost of living keeps rising, and all of that is just it that's a factor of the world that we live in. We live in a world that prioritizes capitalist tendencies, having to make money, having to work really hard, and there's not a lot of leeway for people to go and have these huge transformational growth experiences and be able to reintegrate into society with the grace and time that's needed for true integration, unless there's a significant pot of savings available. And I do think that that can also be, yeah, it can be a sticking point, because it's kind of like the integration time that's needed, depending on the life choices that you make and who you are and background and all that kind of stuff, also requires the integration to be the re-meeting of responsibilities to some extent, and normality, and some of the things that send people away in the first place, because it's like, wow, society as it is too hard, like too intense, too expensive. I can't be the true version of myself in this system, so I'm off to go and have experiences elsewhere. And then you can touch places inside of yourself or with communities that aren't like that, and you can live there forever. But also, if you want to often re-meet family, or you know, be in connection with the world as it is, I feel like there's also that outer example of the duality that you're talking about, of yeah, having to accept that the world as it is horrifically challenging, and it's also really beautiful, and there's magic in every day. So it's, and that's a sticky place. I really think that's a sticky place. It's kind of the myth of coming down from the mountaintop, sharing your gifts with the village people.
Mm.
and and that being a very humbling process, especially when the village might be like, yeah, whatever.
Mm.
Great, great,
Yeah,
you did this cool spiritual thing. Well, what
yeah.
about this?
Mm. Yeah, it's a clangor. But I also, you know, and I agree with you, and I think that, of course, you know, financial constraints can be one of the biggest challenges in terms of actually being able to create space
Yeah,
for change to happen. And I also don't necessarily agree that like it's necessary to like, you know, you have to have savings and drop out and burn it all to the
yeah,
ground. And only then from there can you, you know, I think, I mean, I've worked with so many people over the years where it's actually like, and actually, I've worked with so many people over the years where they're not necessarily doing the big initiatory stuff, but there's a slow kind of burn that starts to happen from the inside when the soul's call is just undeniable.
mm,
And that little spark, you know, is kind of fanned and it just starts to grow. And actually what we see is that from there, life transforms, blossoming out. And really it's about, I mean, so much of it, and I have a bias because this is the nature of my work, but so much of it in the work that I do anyway, is really about authenticity
yeah,
and the willingness to reveal yourself as you are now, because you've changed and the people around you don't understand. And initially there's a like, oh, no one's going to understand. And they might even be actively hostile. So then there's this purification process of, okay, actually, who is supportive for me in my life and who isn't? But the people that I do want to be there, how do I actually build relationship with them? How do I find the meeting place?
Mm.
And the meeting place is what matters. I mean, and I think the meeting place is really what integration is about. It's not about being up here,
Mm.
and it's not about rejecting the world. It's like, where's the meeting place? But it comes back to, again, this intimacy and intimacy with life. Where is the intimacy in my relationships? You know, where is the truth? And so, you know, it's painful because often what it means is loss, the need to let go of things that aren't
Yeah.
working. And people navigating, you know, I work with people a lot in terms of navigating career transitions. Even if they're deeply unhappy, it's still really hard to let go of that job.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's still really hard because of what it meant to them. You know, you were talking about catching up. But this is the thing that I've been working towards my whole life. And now I've got it, and this is a common story. And now I've got it, and it's hollow, crisis of
Yeah.
meaning.
Yeah.
And I have to fucking let go of it. And what
Mm.
now?
Mm. Even if it's killing you, even
Mm,
if there's some awareness on a deep soul level, this is unsustainable for me. And yeah, it's really hard to let go. I see that also. And I understand why, because the jump is scary between who we were and who we're becoming. And as the architecture of who we were starts to fall away and we're starting to make that leap into deeper authenticity, it requires so many levels of bravery,
mm,
bravery in the home, bravery professionally. You know. Yeah, I agree. It's not all about money, but when you've built up your life around having a specific salary and then you actually just really don't want to do that anymore, that's a scary jump. And yeah, there's a huge amount of bravery that's required. And yeah, I think also something that's really challenging in our society and the work that I've done is really people finding it hard to be honest with the people that they love most in their life and who love them the most. It's such an irony, actually. It's like to be the truest expression of ourselves with our lifelong partner or our family members is actually some of the hardest steps to take. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. We feel, well, they're not going to love me,
Mm.
you know, because, and that comes down to like, in a way, it's just like such a core wound. It's like we've been taught that love is conditional on
Yeah.
this. And if I'm this person, and if I'm, you know, bringing in this much money, or if I'm behaving like this, or if I'm into these things. And the reality is that a lot of our bonds are formed around um, mutual interests, which then when they change, that there might not be something at the center.
Mm.
But also sometimes there's something completely else that
Yeah.
emerges, you know, when you realize, well, this is actually the thing that bonds us. But it's very vulnerable because, like you were saying, when we let go, I kind of feel like we have to let go before we actually know what we're being held
Yeah.
by.
Yeah.
It's we
That jump
become
moment, like,
unmoored.
ugh.
We become unmoored. And that's the process of dissolution where it's hardest to like keep things together. And certain people, I think people do better when they have um like really solid home lives or relationships where they're being held in that process of dissolution. Um, I think that can help. But on the other hand, like you were saying, it can also be a constraint if it's like this person's never going to accept me now.
Yeah.
But it's all of these little negotiations. And um, yeah, I suppose it's taken me back to this this word of integration, which is to make whole.
Mm.
And what are we really seeking
Yeah.
when we're going on an initiation? Anyway, it seems to me that it is ultimately about finding a deeper connection. And some of that happens through kind of peak experiences and radical awakening. And then some of it is actually labor. that we have to commit ourselves to in the day to day, which is patiently weaving ourselves into the web of life, into the, into our relationships as we are now, patiently weaving these new insights, these new understandings, into our communities, into our professional work. And patience is such an important word in that. And I think some of the dynamics around this that we're exploring actually comes from, of course, the systems that we're in. You mentioned, consumer capitalism, and it's like, go consume the transformation experience and then go back to work, and that's efficient, right? And perhaps it feels, even though I think it's counterintuitive, less efficient to pay for a therapist every week for X amount of years, or that's less appealing to parts of us. It seems less glamorous. That is the watering that really supports, I think, the weaving.
Yeah. I talk about my dog all the time. I'm going to talk about my dog again. Because resettling him into a new country, abandonment trauma activated, and I'm integrating him into England and watching him on this arc, as you say, like developmental arc. And then within the arc of the stages of integration of him coming into this country, there's spirals that are non-linear. And I can feel that the patience and the time and the dedication and the watering and the weaving and all the things we're talking about is the way that I'm holding him, like my leadership, the way I'm looking after myself, the way I dedicate myself to him, all my choices that I make around his belonging and his well-being, etc. And I can see, I can feel the depth and things shifting, and it's so subtle. And I get glimpses of it where I'm like, wow, it's like, in some ways you could say he's filling himself up, he's integrating, he's feeling safer, he's feeling more whole, I hope, all these different things. And of course he's a dog, but I do think that the arc that we're talking about is so obvious in him. And it's so fascinating to me, as having done a lot of work and understanding around trauma and integration and initiation and abandonment and, all this stuff, and what gets activated. And once everything's out of the box and there's deep instability, actually the foundational basics that need tending to, it's like we cannot actually integrate. Like, he would not integrate into this country if I don't have a solid routine for him, if I don't make the choices that I'm making. And the choices I'm making are making his life easier. And I feel like that's a crucial part, in the integration conversation, because yes, you can book off a week off work after an initiatory experience and rest and come back to yourself, catch up on sleep, and definitely have time and space to journal, make meaning of things, have insights drop in, etc. But really, I think what catapults us into the next stage, as you were saying, is that slow burn of tending that supports us to anchor new habits, create new ways of being. And that's actually really mundane and human in its need for dedication, and often unglamorous. Nobody's watching you when you get up and you do your journaling every day for half an hour. But if it helps your mental health in the long run, wow, what a transformational experience.
I was just laughing to myself because I was like, yeah, unless you post about it on Instagram, which also a lot of people do. But no, I'm with this word tending, which I really love, actually. And, how we tend a fire. And we've been talking a bit about the fires of initiation, and just maybe if it's like, something gets sparked and we can think of it like that. And then we have to keep tending the flame. So you can't walk away from a fire and expect it to still be burning, right? So we keep tending the flame and tending the flame. And yeah, something else, you were talking about trauma and abandonment, and I was thinking about how, integration is essentially like a process of metabolization. Like, we're metabolizing the experience, right?
Yeah.
And in Ayurveda, which is the kind of, ancient Indian system of health, they're very aware that like we digest our experiences, or we don't, right? So and the basis of Ayurveda, like health, is Agni, which is actually the digestive fire, so the flame.
Mm.
But that's not just at the level of food we're putting into our body, it's are we digesting our experiences?
Yeah.
And we could say that trauma is undigested experience, you know. And of course, that's what, some often from early life when we don't actually have the tools to metabolize and make sense and all of that, like experiences get stuck in us and then they're undigested and they create blockages. And so if we think about this process of integration as a process of metabolizing, it's kind of, yeah, the need to, I'm thinking of like, chewing your food well.
Masticate, is that the word?
Yeah.
Masticate your trauma.
Chewing and then but and also just that there is a certain time frame to this, and there's all sorts of different processes involved. Um, and this is how then we come back into wholeness from the fragmentation and from the splitting. And the mundane and the everyday is such an important part of that. So, I mean, I was thinking recently about depth and what is depth. We talk about depth, and again, I think we can talk about different dimensions of depth in the way we're talking about different dimensions of integration. So we can talk about depth of thought and depth of feeling and depth of presence and depth of being, and that there's something about depth which is also about span and range. But it's not just having a span and a range, which can be kind of like complex. It's about integrating all of the different stuff, that then translates to this experience of depth. And I was thinking, well, okay, this is true in terms of like our inner world, but what does depth look like when it's enacted?
Yeah.
What does that look like as behaviors? And I was like, oh, it actually feels like it comes down to a rhythm. So you were talking about daily practice, you were talking about habits. It's like there's something about rhythm and ritual, which we know, which is about creating depth through time, because it's like in the way that, a river gently erodes a stone. It's like through time, we're going to, daily practice, daily connection. This is how we cultivate depth. And for me, I'm so grateful that, I've had a daily meditation practice for 19 years now or something, because I feel like that is what holds me. I I think we need to be held in our processes of transformation, that creates the structure for then the kind of flow to happen. So that daily practice is a crucible. And then it's also something that I come back to. It's a landing pad after any kind of experience. So although it can seem like boring or mundane to have daily practice, I also think it's like that's actually how you it's like microdosing, um you know like transcendence, just a little bit.
Yeah, and it's a great act of self-love to actually care about yourself and your inner worlds and your well-being enough to take the time to do that. And it's kind of like, if you've never been fit physically, I feel like you don't really know what you're missing. And then when you have been fit and then not fit, which I definitely have, it's like, God, I miss that feeling of being fit. And I feel like being in rhythm with the daily practice,
Yeah.
it becomes so compulsory almost, because it just feels so good. For a long time, I've had a rule of no phone, no looking at my phone before have breakfast, or an hour or so after I wake up. And now I'm in my dog walking thing. It's amazing because I don't look at my phone for like nearly 2 hours in the morning, and I'm just out in the wild and feeling the wind on my face and watching the sunrise. And influencers tell you get your sunrise in the sun daily sunlight in the morning. So I'm like, out on the beacon, like, wow, I'm so healthy. But it just feels so good that's a particular habit that I've noticed, that if I do look at my phone when I'm traveling or whatever first thing, and I scroll when I wake up, oof,
Mm,
I really feel it.
mm,
And I know that's just a minor example, but I think it's important because it's like the habit has become so ingrained in me, I don't even have to try and force myself to do it. Whereas there are habits that I'm reaching towards, like my creative practice, for example. Like I'm really wanting to develop my artistry and write a book and turn towards my creativity in a deeper way. And actually, what I'm seeing through that experience is because I'm writing about things that aren't integrated, they're still very fresh.
mm,
I'm seeking some level of integration and catharsis through the
mm,
writing, which is beautiful, but there's also resistance because it means I have to feel it and go there. And it's like, ooh. So making that habit a daily reality is more challenging. So it's like, yeah, I'm good at some stuff, but some stuff's still hard. And that's the layers thing, isn't it? You know, it's places in me that need deeper integration and holding through the
mm,
process of what I'm writing about, and places in me that actually can reach because I'm more
mm,
stable in that area of my life or something like that.
mm.
Yeah.
And we do need holding. Of course, we need holding, you know. I'm just with like how simple that is, and yet
Mm.
how I know it's actually a whole massive piece of work to be able to give yourself the holding that you need.
Yeah.
Massive.
Yeah.
And I think it's related to some of these dynamics we're speaking into, where it's like, okay, I'll go out there and that person will hold me and that experience and that will give me something. And then, but then I'm back to me.
Mm.
And now what? Do I
Mm.
actually know how to love myself?
Mm.
You
Totally.
know,
Mm.
and give myself what I need. And I really agree with you that it's an act of self-love to put these things into place. And I know that it can also be a deep challenge for many of us, especially if
Mm.
we weren't taught or we weren't grown in structures, if we weren't held in that way. We have to learn it.
Mm.
Yeah, well, thank you for this exploration. I feel like it's such an important piece, and I'm certainly, interested in developing more kind of strong pathways for integration,
Mm.
um, that can help people to hold themselves, because it's ultimately not about then me holding them, but them like giving, instilling, cultivating the capacities for people to hold themselves and create the crucible that they need in order to continue their transformational work
Mm.
safely.
Yeah. 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 And I know something that we both really jam on is around impact and leadership. And I feel like that's the kind of coming round as a cycle is when like healing becomes service and artistry, and actually something is made from the experience and given back to the greater whole. And it's not to say that everything you ever do has to be for someone else or for something else, but I do feel like that is a symptom or a symbol that something's been alchemized and integrated when there's some genuine fruits to offer back to the life around us. And I feel like in leadership specifically, it's so important that that sense of grounding and the meeting of the next stage is fully felt. Otherwise, you just got people talking down, about a particular experience, and it's not coming from the heart or coming from the body in a really integrated, embodied way.
Yeah, I'm really with you. This is certainly one of the key things that I work with in my soulful leadership programs is, we if we want to offer a medicine to the world, we actually create that medicine in the process of healing ourselves.
Mm.
You can't bypass the process of going deeply into your wounds, and then whatever that is that you're working with, and the process of working with that is what becomes the medicine that you can offer. And again, I think I see it very common that people want to accelerate that and bypass that. And it's like, this is years long.
Mm.
This is years long. So in terms of this jumping, it's not, oh, I've had a spiritual experience and now I can offer something. What for me, that doesn't jam as just true. I don't think that's how the world works because of this process of metabolization. That's, there's a truth to the fact that we have to digest and before we're ready to really create authentic output. There's a truth to how things grow, so yeah, and within that, I mean, I guess that's really important in terms of what we're saying is just like, in order to metabolize, actively doing integration is really important.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for bringing this important topic, Bonny. And I hope that if anybody watches this and it touches them or sparks something of interest, then reach out to us and let us know. And this, I guess the point of this conversation is to be of use to people and to tease apart what this all means. So I'd love feedback.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Thanks, Bon.